Muslims in American prisons. While it's fortunate that many of them oftentimes are guided to Islam in prison, many incarcerated Muslims face intense discrimination because of their faith. There are many ways to help this vulnerable community. So inshallah in this session we will be hearing what kind of things that we can do, what kind of direct appeals we can do to help them, and to also learn how we can fulfill the obligation upon us to help them. So from visiting a prison for halaqat, public advocacy calls, we're going to be learning how we can raise awareness and what we can do to help them. So today we have with us Hiba Rahim, as well as Yahya Hersey. So Hiba is an American Muslim activist and a community organizer. She has a master's degree in international affairs from Florida State University. She currently works for the Florida chapter of CARE, so that's the Council on American Islamic Relations, where she focuses on programs, outreach, and advocacy. Her work with Muslim inmates advocacy includes working towards policy change, challenging cases of religious discrimination, and creating a network of volunteers to support the incarcerated Muslim community. So without further ado, I'll let her, inshallah, begin, and then I will also introduce our brother Yaqeen. We're going to talk together. Okay, no problems. They're going to be talking together. So, Brother Yahya, I'm going to go to that real quick. MashaAllah, a very long bio, so if you would like more details than I will give, please check it out in the app. But he's currently the senior housing case manager at the Inner City Muslim Action Network in Chicago. He oversees and facilitates the case management relating to the needs of the residents in their transactional housing program. So when he was young, he went through a lot, mashallah, and he's got an incredible story from being at a scene of a crime, even though he had no role in the crime, and getting thrown in jail because of it for a very long time, mashallah, and he's withstood the test of patience. So without going through the rest of his story, please do read it. It's mashallah. It's our brother Yahya right there, and I will throw it over to them.
All right, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Now you have to have a lot more energy to talk about something like this because it's a heavy topic. So Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
First of all, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulullah. I want to start my presentation by telling you guys that I asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring the right hearts and minds into this room today, because this topic is one that is really misunderstood, and most people who I interact with are really unaware of the situation that we're going to discuss today. And so I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the individuals who needed to hear this message and who could carry this message into their communities would be drawn into this room today. And so I want you to consider yourself one of those people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent here for a particular purpose. So again, my name is Hiba Rahim. I work for CARE Florida, the Council on American Islamic Relations in Florida, and I oversee our Muslim inmates advocacy work that we do as part of an overlap between our programs and outreach and our advocacy departments. One of the things that I think surprises a lot of people is that the US, well, this isn't that surprising. How many people knew that the US has the highest incarceration rate in the world? Okay, so not so surprising, most people knew that. But I think what surprises a lot of people is that each state, if each state in the United States was an independent country, then that state would also have a higher rate of incarceration than almost any other democracy in the world. What does that mean? So if the United States as a whole, right, is way, way above countries of the world, then 24 states still have a higher incarceration rate than the United States as a country. And most of the states come right under that before any other democratic country. So what that means is that we have a huge, huge carceral problem in the United States. But from that point, we can talk about a lot of different things. Why is there mass incarceration? What leads to it? Does that mean we have more criminals in the United States, or does that mean that we rely on imprisonment more than other countries do? Does it mean that what does it say about disproportionate sentencing? We could take the conversation to discuss, the racial discrepancies and disparities that we have in the prison. There's so many different directions. But today's presentation is specifically focused on Muslims in US prisons. So just, if you know because you've read the statistic, don't answer. But if you just want to guess, what percent? Muslims make up 1% of the United States population. Okay, so keep that in mind. What percent of the US prison population do you think is Muslim? Anybody? 10%. So almost 1 in 10 incarcerated individuals is Muslim. Some people, like the recent NPR article that came out about this, took this information and was talking about how is this fair that you have 1%, right? Well, how disproportionate is it? 1% of the population is Muslim, but 10% of incarcerees are Muslim? That's not a correct analogy. And the reason is because the vast majority of people who are Muslim in prison convert in prison. Because while the majority of people in here may have been blessed to be born into a Muslim family, to grow up with the values and understanding of Islam, there are many people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests severely in their lives, and their life circumstance leads them to incarceration. And that incarceration is what leads them to the biggest gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them, which is the gift of Islam. And so, subhanAllah, it's really a beautiful thing when you speak to incarcerated Muslims. I've rarely met somebody, man or woman, male or female, who said to me that incarceration was the worst thing that's ever happened. So many incarcerated Muslims, despite the pain that they've experienced through a criminal injustice system or through a background that led them to this place, so many individuals say that incarceration may have been, in a way, the best thing that happened because it led them to Islam. Now the problem is that us, Muslim majority in the free world, don't really understand the reality and the need that exists within the prisons. Sometimes it's just ignorance, like we don't know. Many people I speak to have no idea what's happening on the inside, or that there's such a big percentage of Muslims on the inside. But the reality is that people are drawn to Islam for the spiritual clarity that it gives them. They're drawn to Islam because of the discipline that Islam provides for them. Also sometimes for the brotherhood and the sisterhood and the protection that you get in prison. And these are all reasons that I hear from individuals who I interact with on the inside in prison. And when discussing the need for transparency in US prisons, it was said by a US Supreme Court Justice in the past that sunlight is the best disinfectant. Yet, prisons are the darkest, among the darkest places in the United States. And the reality is that while prisoners, in general, regardless of their background or faith, while prisoners regularly face human rights abuses, regularly are facing extreme difficulty, Muslim prisoners are especially targeted for their faith. It's a different level of discrimination. It's a different level of persecution. And brothers and sisters, there's one thing that I want to say to you that really, really I hope you open your minds and hearts to, and it is this. When we study the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when we go back and study the persecution that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the companions faced at the beginning of Islam, the persecution that was real and raw, the fact that people didn't consider this a religion, they were ridiculed, they were physically assaulted, they were verbally assaulted. All of these things that happened at that time, the only population in the United States that I am aware of that on almost a daily level experiences these types of persecutions is the incarcerated Muslim population, who have to stand up to chaplains and administrators and officers who regularly commit really blasphemous or heinous acts, egregious acts and violations like throwing Qur'ans on the floor or in the toilet, astaghfirullah al-azim, or in the shower, or stepping on prayer rugs, or discontinuing services. And the reality is that incarcerated Muslims do not get the support that they need from Muslims in the free world. So we're going to end this conversation with what you can do to help. But right now I want to pause and hand it over to my brother Yahya to talk about his personal experience so that you can hear it from an individual who experienced this life and the transformation that he was able to make in his life because of Islam. So please join me in welcoming Brother Yaqeen. Hersey from Iman, Green Reentry.
Assalamu alaikum. As the sister said, this is a very, very serious topic. And I know that a lot of people aren't aware of a lot, but I know a lot of us are. By me being with Iman now, a lot of people say, brother, why are you still so passionate about incarceration? And the reason being is that incarceration is what brought me to where I am today. And it's unfortunate that I had to go the path that I went. But I'm thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I did. Just real quick, if you guys remember back in 1992 when Bill Clinton was on this whole crime bill, and he created all these laws and all these policies, a lot of Americans, a lot of people around the world really didn't understand the impact of what was being done. I happen to be one of those individuals that suffered from that crime bill, that we know once his wife took on her political career, Bill Clinton was forced to admit to the world that he had made a mistake, that crime bill was wrong, and he began to try to backtrack. At the age of 17, I was arrested and charged with accountability to murder. Even though I had no role, no active participation, I was charged with this crime. Because of this crime bill, accountability carried the same time as the actual offense. So if you were present, even if you didn't participate, if you did not agree to either testify, or if you did not agree to go along with the state's attorney, you were charged, prosecuted, and sentenced as the actual offender. During this time, I had no criminal background, I had never been incarcerated, and ultimately I was sentenced to 120 years. Miraculously, out of nowhere, 28 years later, the U.S. Supreme Court and the Illinois Supreme Court agreed that this law was unconstitutional, that it was not fair, and in their attempt to correct a wrong, they went through the Department of Corrections, and all of us that had been incarcerated for 20, 25, myself 28 years, they just said, hey, my fault, don't worry about it, we'll send you home. That's literally all we got. And to me, that was something that didn't sit right. Because the judge looked me in my face, my sister was there, my wife was there, and the judge literally said, I cannot undo what was done, but you're going home tonight. To her, that was like great. To me, it was like, hold on. For 28 years, I've been saying, this is wrong. And all I get is I can't undo it. So I made it my personal mission to stay connected to incarceration, to stay connected to criminal justice reform, and to basically speak on these issues, which is why when I was first invited to speak, I kind of didn't want to, not because I didn't have an interest, but because I wondered what kind of impact would it have. And then after I spoke with Sister Hilba, and we just sat around huddled up trying to come up with an agenda, I understood that it was necessary. For a lot of people in our community, we are, you're born Muslim, so it's like a given. Like many Americans are born Christian, so they never even think about anything other than being Christian because they were born Christian. For many people in the Muslim community, they were born Muslim. And I think a lot of us take that for granted. Because a lot of individuals, unfortunately, find Islam, as Sister Hiba said, in prison. And the reason being is that we live in a society that is so backwards that when an individual is introduced to Islam, when he is quiet, when he is still, when everything in his life has been removed, and Islam is presented to him, it does something that can't even be explained in words. And that's why so many people find Islam in prison. Because it is an answer to the problems and issues that we have in this society. The problem with that is, once brothers take Shahada, once brothers begin to learn the deen and live the deen and walk in the deen, they become persecuted, sought out, and harassed by the administration. For those who don't know, most prisons are located in areas of states, in every state, where most times there are no Muslims. This is not a racist statement, but in a lot of these areas, there are rural communities around European Americans who have never even seen a Muslim, let alone anything other than who they are. So imagine coming into this prison Muslim. Something as simple as putting on a kufi makes you an enemy. Because post 9/11, once 9/11 happened, it just changed the game inside the prisons in America. Because now these prison guards looked at Muslims as being the enemy. They looked at us as being just like them. So whoever they deemed as being the enemy, we were also a part of that. And this was the one thing that the administration, the officers, the staff could bond together despite their other personal differences. They all bond together under the banner of, we don't like Muslims. Something as simple as like recreation. You go to the yard, you're playing basketball and working out and everybody doing whatever they're doing. And if a group of Christians were to get together, which this actually happened, I witnessed this with my own eyes. When they get together on the yard, and there's groups of Christians, they can form a circle, I don't care if it's 100 people, and they can pray. And the guards will watch them, staff will welcome it. Some staff will even go join in the prayer circle. But as Muslims, many times we do things together. So if we're playing basketball, we'll stop. They had water fountains in the yard or whatever. We would make wudu, and then we would go to make salat. We were attacked by guards for making salat because in their minds, we were like a gang or like terrorists or whatever. So the same group of individuals who support Christians praying together, when it came to Muslims praying together, we were harassed, thrown in segregation, and many times beaten because brothers didn't appreciate, the way in which we were engaged. When they do regular cell shakedowns and the guard comes in and asks a Muslim to step out of his cell, the experience is totally different. When other inmates return to their cell, that stuff is searched through, it's done in a respectful manner. As a Muslim, when you return to your room, most times your Quran is thrown on the floor, stepped on, left that way so that you can see it. Prayer rugs thrown in the toilet. Like these are the things and extremes that they go through to persecute and harass Muslims. So one of the things that's key, in my opinion, of the Muslim experience is the lack of support from the Muslim community. Every other community in prison has representatives that come out and support them. The Christians have chaplains, evangelists, missionaries, so on and so forth. As far as the Muslim community, most times we have no one. So no one comes and checks on the Muslim. No one comes to make sure that Ramadan, is done correctly. Most institutions do not allow inmates to lead services. So if a Muslim volunteer does not come out, there is no Jummah. There is no Talim. There is no congregating of Muslims inside of prison unless there's a volunteer. And even if the administration allows us to congregate, it's done in a manner in which they try to change the religion. And by us standing on the Sunnah of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we all know that that's something that we're just not willing to give. So most times we're praying in our rooms alone. We have went years without Jummah because of this. And I believe it's not because the Muslim community does not care. I believe it's because the Muslim community just doesn't know what really happens behind the walls, behind these bars, in prison. One story I want to leave you with today, inshallah, to really paint the picture of how beautiful Islam is inside of prison, amongst those who embrace Islam. I was in a prison one time where the entire kitchen staff quit, right? They quit. The reason they quit was because it was the month of Ramadan, and the institution had made preparation for the Muslims to eat at the end of fast, which was in the evening. The regular food line ended maybe like 5 o'clock. I believe this year Ramadan ended maybe like 7:30. So the staff had to stay over 2 hours in order to wait to feed the Muslims. They didn't like that, didn't appreciate it, and they walked out. So the administration came and asked, what could we do to help? The Muslim community unanimously volunteered not only to make sure that the Muslims ate that night, but to take over the kitchen the next day because the staff wouldn't come in. And the Muslims, during the month of Ramadan, prepared the food, served the food, cleaned the dietary, and made sure the entire institution ate. After the month of Ramadan, the institution actually asked the Muslims to take over and basically run the kitchen. That's the spirit of Islam. These were brothers that couldn't even eat because we were fasting. Brothers that had been persecuted by the administration that stepped up to fill a void that needed to be filled. So if anybody in this room has any desire to help, that's where it begins. That's where it begins. We all can't do everything, but we can all do something. We would write masjids for years asking, just send somebody, just one person, so we can have Jumu'ah. And it would never happen. And I believe a lot of times, as a society, being free now, me being free, I believe sometimes we feel that if they're in prison, they had to do something bad. So why should I help? He's there for a reason. These are hardened people. These are the worst of the worst in that. But if we actually follow the Sunnah and the history of Islam, we know that is not the way of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the same struggles that the early believers went through, as Sister Hiba said, is what Muslims are going through in prisons all across America, are being persecuted and abused simply for taking Shahada. And it's real. Imagine during the month of Ramadan, somebody coming to drug test you ain't drink water all day. And now because you can't produce a drug sample, you're thrown in segregation for 6 months. These are the realities with nobody to advocate. So please, if you take nothing from this presentation, please take the need to support those who are incarcerated who have taken Shahada. I appreciate you. Assalamu alaikum.
There's really so much that we could talk about, really so much that, so many examples that I would love to give you. And these examples will really break your heart. They will break your heart because I think it's unfathomable to believe that these types of things happen. They do happen, even though, a lot of people say, well, isn't that against the law? Isn't that against the rules? Yes, it's against the law and it's against the rules, but there's no accountability. And they're self-investigating, that's the whole point. So how can you help? I said at the beginning of the presentation, but since then more people have walked in, how can you help? Before this presentation and for a long time I've been making dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send the right hearts and minds into this room so that the people who can actually take this message back to your communities and make a difference will hear this. So please consider that a responsibility if you're here. How can you help? Well, there are multiple ways to help. I don't want to give you all this information and make you feel overwhelmed without a solution. There are very simple solutions. There are very easy solutions. And we'll break it into 2 sections. There's a solution during incarceration. How can you support during incarceration? Well, one of the things that you can do is raise community awareness. Whether it's to your masjid, whether it's with your circle of friends or influence, raise community awareness about this issue. Tell people, I have told people in my city that you are sending aid all the way around the world to where people actually need it, but there are brothers and sisters in our backyard, right down the road, who need support, who are being persecuted, and you don't even know they exist. Find out how many Muslims there are. Find out where your local prison is, or jail. And the difference between a jail and a prison, we can discuss in Q&A, but prison is a long-term sentence, okay?
Right.
So find out where your state prisons are, or your jails, and call the chaplain. Just dial the number. Can I speak to the chaplain? How many Muslims are you serving? Find out. If it's just one, that one person might need support. And often, when we're talking about these big numbers, and I call these prisons, they'll say, oh, we had 70 brothers at Jummah last week. We have 150 brothers participating in Ramadan. We're talking about big numbers, big congregations. So raise community awareness. Also, volunteer for Jummah, or what in Florida we call ta'lim, which is the equivalent of a halaqah. Okay, volunteer. When you call the chaplain or look online, fill out a volunteer application form and become a volunteer. Now, maybe because I'm used to this work, that's very simple and straightforward, but just to break it down a little further, to become a volunteer means that you go through a security background and clearance, and you have permission to join during religious services. So you can join as one of the brothers, as an imam, you can give the khutbah, you can join during ta'lim and teach something that you know, or you can just go for brotherhood and companionship and be there as somebody from the outside to let them know that they care. And lastly, advocate where possible. Not every person in here is going to be an advocate, and not everybody needs to be an advocate. That's definitely a fight. You have to fight sometimes. But you can definitely be a volunteer for your Muslim brother or sister. You can be a brother to your incarcerated family. So these are just different ways that you can support. And I want to announce something that I'm really, really happy to announce. And this CARE Florida has launched, and this has been in the works for a long time, a Muslim Inmates Advocacy Guide. So here, this is online, and I'll have the QR, oh, there's no QR code. Well, I'll have a QR code, I'll put it up here at the end if you want to scan it and download it for free. But this Muslim Inmates Advocacy Guide basically takes you through the carceral system and the situations that we're describing here. There's a quote that somebody said, you know, I've been locked up for 11 years, and every day we see Christian volunteers come by, but you're the first Muslim I've seen from the free world come to visit us, alhamdulillah. Imagine that. And these, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I personally and other volunteers have heard quotes like this. So this document right here goes through some case studies of Jummah cancellation and fear litigation and different aspects like that. It also, you know, has a real picture of brothers on the inside. And I know these brothers because they gave me this picture personally. They said, Sister Hiba, let the world see us and let them know we're waiting for them. And that's the message that, you know, they're writing. They're so grateful for the services, but the reality is that there are sisters and brothers who are going through a lot on the inside, and they need your support, and this will help guide you through that support process. So I'll leave the QR code on my laptop at the end if you want to come up and scan it, but you know, that's for support during incarceration. What about post-release support? I'll wrap up in 2 minutes so we can go through Q&A. But post-release support, when brothers and sisters are returning citizens coming back into the society, we know as a community, let's be real, that we're not very welcoming even to, you know, people, just anybody. You know, if it's a new person at the masjid, we don't have a welcoming committee. We don't go welcome. We don't have that culture, though we should. But particularly if somebody looks different or maybe comes in tattooed up or whatever it is, we pass judgment. We do. That's just how we are as humans, but that's what we have to overcome as Muslims. And that's a really important aspect that I want you to pay attention to, is the brotherhood and the sisterhood that takes somebody under your wing, like the Muhajirin and the Ansar, like the Ansar did to the Muhajirin. And the other thing, when we discussed with incarcerees who are released, and Brother Yahya and I discussed this, is helping with job opportunities. It's a whole nother presentation to discuss how hard it is to be released from prison and to be successful. Because the system is designed to break you and to, you know, push you toward a path of recidivism and going back to prison. Whether it's not able to find a job, it's just thing after thing after thing after thing. Okay? So helping, these are the top two things that people came back with, is the brotherhood and the sisterhood, which is easy. All of us should be able to provide that. And if you have the ability to help with job opportunities to get a brother or sister on his or her feet, that's always very helpful. And like I said, the next steps would be to educate yourself and those around you. The next steps would be to participate in this fard kifaya. What is a fard kifaya? It's a community obligation. This is an obligation upon everyone. I'm not just making this appeal here because I think it's important for us to do. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam tells us that this is a fard upon the community. When you have Muslims who are being prevented from joining for Jummah, being prevented from praying or fasting, they're being prevented from performing the religious obligations, then us as a community have a fard to step up and stand up and speak out for them. So this is a fard kifaya. Now that you've heard it, you're accountable. So make sure you do something with it. Download the guide, and of course contact Care Florida if you need help setting up this system of volunteer work. Contact Iman Reentry. If you're from Chicago, there's a very successful system that they have set up here. You want to volunteer? Contact them. You want more information? Contact them. Your impact is really important, and I don't want you to downplay or not give that the attention that it needs. I just want to end by thanking Salma Abdurrahman, who previously worked for Care Florida, but has now moved on, studying law school, mashallah, but she was the mastermind behind this toolkit, so thank you so much, Salma, jazakallah khair. And I also want to recognize my family sitting in the front seat, my sister and her sisters and her children. So thank you for your support, thank you all for coming, and inshallah we'll do questions and answers, and we'll talk about how to go from here and set up these systems of support in your community. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum.
Jazakumullah khair for that excellent talk on these topics. Wallahi, they're super heavy. MashaAllah, Hiba got ahead of a lot of the questions, so I'm doing my best to kind of adjust them a little bit. You touched on it a little bit by talking about the implicit biases that we sometimes have regarding tattoos, for example. Some of the questions are asking, how can we move, like how can we deal with the stigmas? Like what can we do to kind of try to address them and move past them? And then another related one was kind of similar to that, but like especially with inmates that might have a more violent kind of past, what can we do to connect with them while taking safe measures without making them feel like second-class citizens, like they are what their past was?
It's a very important question. Go ahead.
This might work.
Should we? Okay.
To answer that question, it's really not an easy answer. It's really not a one answer fit all type of thing. But I believe that safety is key. So we should all proceed with caution when dealing with anybody. One of the things, and I'm not trying to get off topic, but one of the things I used to always tell prison guards who used to look down on inmates, and who used to just look down on inmates. I used to always say the next person to rob somebody is not in here, they still out there. Like you in here trying to persecute me, but the next person that's gonna probably try to rob me is probably in Walmart parking lot, So just understanding that just because prisons are filled with people who committed crimes doesn't mean all the criminals are locked up. There's a statistic, and this is a fact. Most people that commit violent offenses are first-time offenders. That is a fact. So with that in mind, it's just getting to know who you're dealing with. As Sister Hiba said, trying to volunteer and connect with people before they make the transition. Because a lot of times you can feel that sincerity. If we go back without being going too far into a religion, but if you just go back to the early companions and you study their stories of who they were, if they lived in this society, many of them would be deemed as the worst of the worst. They would probably have been to prison maybe 2 or 3 times. But because of Islam and because they took Shahada, these are the companions that not only we refer to, but these are the companions that actually authenticate Hadith. And these are individuals who had kind of bad pasts, who were known pre-Islam for being somewhat bad people. So I believe in the tradition of Islam and in the tradition of the Rasulullah, we have to move with compassion. And we all make salat. And each time we make salat, we say, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim. We are constantly reminded of Allah's mercy and Allah's grace.
I'm going to add something to that really quickly. So One thing I didn't say earlier, but my recommendation based on, unless you're working in the field and you're going to spread messages of, advocacy for brotherhood or sisterhood, I do recommend that the brothers go to the brothers' prisons and the sisters go to the sisters' prisons, or the brothers go to the sisters' prisons also for khutbah to do jama'ah or something like that. That's my personal recommendation. But I will say, and that's mostly because of the emotional attachment that can happen, when you're in these spaces. But what I will say is, when you meet these individuals, like when you enter this space, strip yourself of all judgment. Understand your intention before you go. One question that I have never asked any incarcerated person, and nor should anybody, is, what did you do? Why are you in here? Because when a person takes shahada, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives all their sins, then who are we to continue to define them by their former actions? It is an egregious injustice that we do to fulfill our curiosity, to ask somebody what they did. The other thing is that we need to recognize, especially immigrants and children of immigrants in this society, that our upbringing was very, very different than the upbringing of a lot of people who are in carceral situations. And that if our upbringing was different, then we may be one of those individuals. But not just that. If our complexion was different, if our neighborhood was different, then we may be in those situations. What do I mean by that? I mean that many of the people that I've met, some of them are serving 15-year sentences, one of them is serving a life sentence, and you may not understand how you'd be serving a life sentence for drug charges, but it's because of the way, as Brother Yahya mentioned, the laws were set up to lock people up for prolonged, ridiculous periods of times. But many of us might know somebody who's done drugs, but we were never subject to the criminal justice system because of the situation or our background or our neighborhood or the lack of policing or whatever it might be. So be very careful not to pass judgment. When you're in the masjid and somebody comes in, be very careful not to pass judgment. And finally, exercise wisdom, as Brother Yahya said. Not everybody, we're not saying go in and everybody's going to be your best friend. Not everybody in the free world is your best friend. And there are people in the free world who you accept, and there's some people in the free world who you're cautious from. That's called being smart and being wise. So the same thing applies in these situations. But there are no boundaries to brotherhood and sisterhood and support.
Hey, I just want to add real quick. Another fact to remember is that most individuals who are incarcerated will be released. So especially those that become Muslim, it's even more imperative to support before they get released, because they're going to be released anyway. That's just a fact. It's just something to keep in mind.
So again, for anyone that came late, there is a QR code at the front for any information that you might want with regards to how to further help. I'm not sure if in that QR code when you download that, one question was, are there ways to get involved in a new city, like networks that you can easily plug into to kind of try to help inmates more?
Unfortunately, this work is definitely on the rise, but it's not in many cities that I'm aware of. So we do have a network of organizations who are involved with incarcerated Muslims across the United States, and they're mostly a few in California, Florida, Georgia. There's more, they're on the rise. But your masjid is enough to start something like this. You can join a movement if it exists, but your masjid is certainly enough, and every masjid should be involved with the local jails and prisons. So that's what I would recommend, is go through the guide that's online, download the PDF, find out how you can get involved, and then talk to your masjid leadership about finding brothers and sisters. Usually, there's so many more brothers than there are sisters. So like in Florida, for example, if there were 10,000 Muslim brothers, there might be 100 to 150 sisters. It's many, many more brothers.
One more question was regarding, this one, it's kind of like on a larger sense, and to kind of add on to it, I've personally read before that the biggest barrier for a lot of released inmates is when they plug back into society. So is there anything that, what can people in their local communities do with regards to organizations helping with transitional homes, particularly for inmates coming out? Like, what can they do to try to help raise awareness, get homes going, I guess?
That's you.
So fortunately, right now, I actually serve with Inner City Muslim Action Network as a senior housing case manager. So I actually oversee the transitional housing. But unfortunately, we only have 20 beds. So this problem is bigger than something that just the Inner City Muslim Action Network can handle. One of the biggest barriers on transitioning back out, outside of just housing, is just support. Because when many of us transition out, we have to connect with each other in order to get support. So other formerly incarcerated Muslims assist other formerly incarcerated Muslims. Unfortunately, a lot of masjids are not, as the Sister Hiba said, are not set up to assist because of the stigmas. So I think one of the main things that can happen now are local masjids creating programs, which some do already. If a brother comes home and he has his release papers and he goes to the masjid will get asylum. He'll help him out. I think that has to be done more. It has to be done more. For the men in this room who are part of a masjid and a brother returns to society and he comes to the masjid, he makes salat, and he lets it be known that he has just been released, the type of support he needs is that brotherhood. Because for many Muslims, as we began, they became Muslim in prison. So they were never Muslim in the free world. Many of you in this room were raised Muslim. So to be able to help somebody make that transition and step back into this world Muslim is probably the greatest gift you can give.
More questions? Okay, because I do want to give a closing comment.
I just want to say, brothers and sisters, that I hope you leave inspired to do something, inshallah. I pray that you do. My card is up here if you'd like, and my email address is there if you want to follow up with questions or anything like that. But I want to be real about the situation, and the reality is you have to have a heart of a fighter to be in this, a volunteer in this world. And the reason is because the systems, especially some systems in some states more than others, like Florida, for example, where we are, the system is designed not only to put down individuals who are incarcerated and to oppress and subjugate and persecute, particularly the Muslims, but it's also designed to keep people out. As much as they try to recruit and they say, yes, we're recruiting volunteers, they give us roadblock after roadblock after roadblock, but don't feel despair because of that. Let that empower you. Let that see. When you see that somebody is pushing you out, then know that there's a reason they're pushing you out, and it's because you really need to be there. So keep, be persistent and follow through. And as annoying and difficult as it might be, follow through because, we try to make an impact. That's what we do as Muslims. We try to make an impact. This is an incredibly underserved community, and the impact there will be felt and appreciated in a way that is so profound, you can't even imagine. So I pray that Allah blesses you and honors you so that you are able to serve in this capacity, because it really is an honor and a blessing, inshallah.
Inshallah.
Yeah, we can go. And it's not just, Brother Malcolm, we always think of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, Brother Malcolm X. It's not just him who is like the giants that come out of prison. We have many, many giants. Many, many giants who emerge from the prisons. And I do want to say this. One of the most humbling moments when I was in one of my first visits, I said to the brother, oh brother, what do you need help with? I can try to get brothers from the community to come. Do you guys need help with salah? Usually, the new converts, they need help with salah, they need help with understanding, learning Arabic, things like that, Quran. He said, sister, I have just finished reading my second time Revival of the Islamic Sciences by Imam al-Ghazali, and I really just need something more challenging, And since then, I've heard many people. I've attended some of the best khutbahs of my life from imams in prison. I've heard some of the most beautiful adhans. When we talk about the movie, The Message, Bilal does not do justice to the adhan in that movie because it's said that his voice was so beautiful. I have heard the most beautiful adhans in the prison. So I'm just saying,
don't go in there with a preconceived notion that usually a lot of times it's going to be the basics, but there are scholars in the prisons, and they really need that support.
We like bubbling over here. We understand you got the question about the little car, but we want to ask stuff and want to address them personally. Can we do that?
I think if
Right
you have
afterwards?
time after,
Yeah.
you can also ask some questions.
No, I want to ask when everybody get here. I don't want to ask and quiet.
Yeah, it's actually supposed to end right now, but
One of my things on that car, but I see you ain't getting to it. It must not been enforced. Enough.
I tried to combine them.
Okay.
Sorry. Which one is it?
The one about asking about Muslims in jail, about
The different experiences?
about them being model prisoners.
Oh, yeah. So one of the questions was, since we do have a minute or two left, are a lot of the inmates, is it true that they are like, they maintain exemplary kind of, they have a high standard, like they're always well behaved? Because we definitely hear that a lot as Muslims.
But he didn't put it in context. My thing is this. In prison, you talked about the administration targeting the Muslims. But isn't it also true that the Muslims are the most, like, so-called, lack of a better word, behaved? You know what I'm saying? The model prisoners, those who don't read, drink, those who are in college. You know what I'm saying? Those, you know what I'm saying? All of the social ills, you know what I'm saying? They are the most behaved, the most don't have to be policed a lot. If that's so, and the Muslims are like this, why do you think they still get targeted like they do, Quran on the floor and stuff like that?
Well, to answer your question, yes, most in the Muslims community in prison, Muslims hold each other to a high standard. So if you take Shahada and you join the community in prison, I mean, brothers is on you. Like, you can't be faking and living one way and saying one thing. That's impossible. I believe, in my personal opinion, the reason why they are still persecuted is because this society has a bad taste toward Islam. And many people don't understand it.
But even while these people get the less tickets, they get the less write-ups, they get the less put in segregation for breaking the law or offense in jail. I'm saying, I just want that to be known, that the Muslims of prison are the most best behaved people there. In all prisons, most.
And I want to add one thing just to add context to what the brother is saying. So as I stated earlier, I was 17 years old when I got incarcerated. I had not finished high school. By the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, once I embraced Islam, not only did I finish high school, but I also got my college degree, and I became one of the first inmates in the state of Illinois to become a licensed entry-level substance abuse counselor in prison. And after doing this, I still had to fight because the administration felt that I still shouldn't teach other inmates, even though other inmates needed the help, that I wasn't to do it because I was an inmate. So I began to write people over them and write people over them and write people over them to the point to where they allowed it. And that allowed me and other individuals to start advocating for prison rights in a new way. Because now I just wasn't the ID number in the inmate. Now I was an actual professional and your colleague. So you had to respect, you know, what I was bringing to the table. So, and my story, as she said, is repeated hundreds of times in prison. There are hundreds and thousands of brothers who did what I did. They just don't get a chance to share their story.
So this will be the last question, inshallah, and if the speakers have time after, you can approach them, but just for the sake of time, the session was actually over 5 minutes ago. This one is specifically regarding gang politics. Like, after they come out, what can we do to help the former inmates kind of protect them from the gang politics in their city? What can we do to help?
Alhamdulillah. Great question. Actually, what I said earlier, just providing that brotherhood, because Islam is such a strong brotherhood that it replaces that anyway. So just being there for your brother, being open for your brother, allowing him to join in with fellowship, coming to the masjid, you know, during Ramadan, different things like this, it removes a desire.
How about keeping them safe?
Most times the organizations or the gangs will leave them alone if they see them doing something different. When I transitioned back out, the individuals that I had issues with or whatever, I didn't have issues with because I stuck to what I knew, and that was Islam. You know, and just so happened in our city in Chicago, we have a high population of individuals returning from prison. So, you know, we kind of stay together. But to answer your question in short, just providing that brotherhood.
Jazakumullah
everybody. Please let's give one last round of applause.